So we're already starting off the month of November with a card that would have sold. It would have been the second highest sale, I think, second highest sale in all, no, third highest, but in the same range. So there was a Shohei Ohtani, Bowman. It looked like it was numbered 8 of 25. It was a BGS 10 black label with a 10 autograph, sold through Golden this weekend for $533,000. And I think I did enough talking about Otani on Friday's episode. I think now we are going to start to see some of these more rare, more expensive cards sell, because I also think that one thing that's maybe holding back some of these Otani cards is that, like, he has a global audience. So I think that there's a decent shot that some of these cards, some of these expensive rare cards that Otani owns are not in the States. Like, either they're in Japan. I mean, obviously, because he's from Japan, so there's a possibility there. I think also his marketability is global. So I think that there's a decent shot that some of those cards that are some of these rare ones that are going to be expensive, like let's just say his Superfractor Auto or something crazy, something where I could see it being a one or one and a half, $2 million card, they could potentially start to get sold soon, because we're seeing more and more of these expensive cards of his. Because, which, like I said, I was shocked, to be honest, when for up until like recently, his most expensive card was only like $330,000, which is that's no small number. But like, when you see LeBron and Brady and all of these players have $1 million sales, like, I was a bit surprised that, like, this player who is the face of baseball, no, without a doubt, maybe didn't have the best World Series necessarily, but like 60, 50, an insane season, MVP type season. Like, it just was surprising to me that he wouldn't have any of these like $1 million sales. So that being said, I also wanted to go through some of the sales that were from October. And I'll go through 10 to 1. I think, yeah, I'll just go through 10 to 1 here. So there was a Jordan LeBron card auto from 2009 Exquisite, sold for $204,000. A Babe Ruth SGC 1.5 that sold for $232,000. I'm just going to say that 232,000. There was a Mickey Mantle PSA 7 that sold for $264. Another Jordan, not an RPA, but a patch. I think it's an autograph. I believe it was an autograph. I can't see if it's an autograph on here. $264,000. There was a 1959 Mickey Mantle PSA 9 that sold for $300K. I'd have to imagine that must be the highest grade for that card. I don't know why it would sell like for so much higher than like a PSA 7 of the 52 tops. Then you had another Babe Ruth 2.5 PSA 2.5 sold for $384. A C Mathewson SGC 5. It says it's a 1903, so this must just be an older Sporting Life card. $390,000. A Sport Kings Babe Ruth autograph PSA authenticated sold for $471,000. A Jordan Exquisite PSA 9 with a 10 auto sold for $563,000. And then the number one card that sold in October was a 2003 LeBron Gold Refractor PSA 10, which I believe the gold refractors are numbered to 50. So PSA 10, that's probably, I can't imagine there's too many PSA 10s of that card. And that one sold for $645,000. So this Otani card sold for $533. So like I said, that's probably, I would imagine that will be the most expensive card in November. I don't know what other cards are up for auction necessarily, but like a $533,000 sale in this time of the sports card market, I think is very impressive. And I think the other thing that's very interesting about that list is that there are no modern cards on there, but it's a good mixture of vintage and then sort of like 2000s, like their 2009 is the newest card that sold. There was a 2003, two 2003s, a bunch from the 50s. Obviously, the Babe Ruth cards are all from 1916. So again, no modern cards, which I think is good, just from a from a volatility standpoint, I think some of these the newer modern, and I think ultra modern, we're starting to get into that era as well. I think it's probably better that people are not spending this type of money on those types of cards because of the volatility of the player still playing. Like, I think Anthony Richardson is a perfect example, which I don't think I talked about Anthony Richardson last week on the podcast, that he was benched, which, again, another Florida player that did I? I don't remember off the top of my head if I did or didn't talk about Anthony Richardson getting benched, but another Florida player who stinks. I know I've talked about like Kyle Pitts. This stinks, unfortunately. I don't know what's happening with these Florida players. They go pro and then they end up turning into not good players. I don't know. But, because Anthony Richardson, he did have that little bit of a controversy where he called himself out of the game. Like, he called for a sub when he like either got tackled, he slid or something happened where he got like hurt, but like he wasn't hurt. He just wanted to get called out of the game. But now he's benched for Joe Flacco. And I think I don't know. It may also be that there may not be any like ultra modern cards that people want to buy. That might be the other thing, because in the past few years, at least, I like Wemby, I think will probably end up having one of those cards. If I had to guess, like, I don't know, there probably will be a sale of one of his cards in that high, 6-figure range. There was also a Jalen Brunson, which was kind of interesting, that sold over the weekend for just under $100,000. I actually wrote that card on SI a little bit if you want to go check out that article. But I think overall, my thoughts on that list of the top 10 cards, it's good to see that cards are still selling for that value. That's definitely a good thing. But again, the cards are skewing way more towards rare, way more towards old vintage stuff. Some stuff from the 2000s, but I really think it's going to be very limited, I think, is what you'll find with what is going to eventually sell if it's from the 2000s in general. I think a lot of it's going to be LeBron stuff. I don't know. I think if KD can go on some type of run, I wouldn't be surprised if there's KD. I mean, Steph from 2009. Like, I think that there are eras and periods of time within sports where certain auctions are going to bring certain values to cards, if that makes sense. Like, I think it depends on, like, if a card is going to sell for $1 million or $2 or $3 million, I really do think it's going to have to be like almost like the premier card of an auction, where they purposely are not selling they're purposely not selling other high 6-figure cards because they want to get the most value for this one. And I wonder if that's some sort of option here. If you're Golden or you are, I don't know, Fanatics Collects or any of these big auctions, like, I wonder if there is an option to allocate some sort of funding to not allowing other cards to be sold, which, again, I don't think it's the best idea from a market perspective. It's definitely closer to manipulating the market than it is actually letting the cards sell for what they should sell for. But at the same time, if you have like 2 or 3 or 4 very rare cards that all could sell in the $1 million, but it's like, if they all could sell in the $1 million, there's probably going to be some sort of cap on how many of these cards are going to sell and what they will sell for, because like if you have multiple expensive rare cards, there is just a higher probability that you're going to run into an issue where there's going to be one person that wants to buy this card, and maybe they want to buy some other cards, and the value of that one card is going to drop potentially. Supply and demand, I guess, is one way to look at it in some sense. But overall, this list for October, very strong. Looks good. I mean, again, no $1 million sales, but that's okay. I think we've seen a significant drop in $1 million sales over the past few years. I wouldn't be surprised if we see an Ohtani card sell this offseason for $1 million. Like, with how good of a season he had, it really seems like everybody is going to try to sell high this offseason on Ohtani. So it wouldn't surprise me if we get up to that $1 million sale for him, which right now, still his highest sale, which could also be that he has so many more cards than some of these other players. So again, it's the market cap of a certain player that is very interesting, and really I think has a more of a determining factor on what the high price of a player's card sales could be, versus like a LeBron or versus like a Jordan or any of these vintage cards where there's one card for there's essentially one card for Mickey Mantle. There's essentially one card for, like, let's say LeBron, or there's maybe a couple for Babe Ruth, but there's essentially one that you really want to get. But if you look at any of these individual sales, you'll see why I think those cards are selling for that price, and then maybe some modern and ultra modern cards are not selling in that same price range. This week we have the pre-order for this year's Bowman draft, and the cover athletes for this year's Bowman draft are going to be Travis Bazzana and Jack Corglion, I think is how you pronounce his last name. I always mess that up. But so I think at least I was thinking about those two players specifically. And I have knowledge on those two players because one of them, Bazzana, played for the Commodores, which is the Cape Cod Baseball League. If you're really deep into sports, if you're really deep into baseball, then you may have heard of the Cape Cod Baseball League. Essentially, it's just like a 10-team summer baseball league where college players, probably about the year before they're about to get drafted, go and play. And Bazzana was the MVP for last season's Cape League, and he played for Falmouth, which is the team that's where I'm from. So, and Corglion, I know because he played for Florida, which is one of my favorite colleges, but he was also supposed to come to the Commodores, but was so good that he actually just went straight to Team USA camp and for that summer and played with Team USA, like their development program, rather than coming to the Cape League, which was kind of unfortunate because I would have loved to have seen him play. But those two players I sort of have the knowledge of, and it got me thinking that, like, when it comes to prospecting and sports cards sort of in general, I think it's important to make sure you are making the decisions to buy cards or buy prospects that you maybe have seen, or that, like, because here's the thing, like, I know those two players. So, like, this cover gets me really excited because both of those two players are essentially they'll be in the product because obviously they're the cover athletes, and they're going to be getting their first Bowman. And there were also a couple other Commodores players that were drafted in the top 10, so I'm excited for them to get their first Bowmans as well. But again, I know those players, so, like, I can make a recommendation that I think they're going to be good. But that's because I saw them playing, not in college necessarily. I mean, I watched some of the Florida games with Corglion because I know he played in the Florida last year, not this last season, but the season before that. Florida made it to the national championship, which Paul Skeens played in, I believe. It was LSU versus Florida, and LSU, I think, won in game 3 of that series. But that's not really super important. But the thing is, with these prospects and just with prospecting in general, it's important to have your own way to evaluate prospects, because just this is I think this is a perfect example. I know of those two players. So, like, if you were to ask me who are going to be the good players that are coming out of this year's Bowman, those would be my first two players. Now, obviously, they're also the cover athletes, so it's not necessarily hard to recommend the two cover athletes for the product, and and recommend the first overall pick. It actually, interesting enough, another first overall pick, Adley Rushman, also played for the Commodores. That's just kind of a side thing there. But there are going to be people who are recommending prospects and players and cards who have probably more knowledge than some other people on those players. Like, they've either seen them play, or, in my sense, like, I knew them because they were playing in a summer league. So I think it's important for people to recognize that just because someone knows the player doesn't really necessarily mean they're going to be good, because that's sort of the other piece of it. It's like, there are players who are going to be getting their first Bowman who potentially will never make it to the MLB. And there's, first overall picks, it's fairly rare. I mean, the last decade of first overall picks, there's probably only like one or two that were really total I don't really want to call him bust, but like Mark Appel comes to mind. I mean, he didn't make his major league debut. He was going through some stuff while he was playing in the minors, which is, he didn't make his major league debut until I think it was last MLB season, not this past one where the Dodgers won. I think it was the season before that. But again, first overall pick, not necessarily super hard to recommend, I suppose. But when you are watching content, just know that there's going to be people that have more knowledge about those players than others, and to not to put their names on pedestals like the players, because for me at least, and I know I definitely fall into this conversation, it's like if I see a player that I've never heard before and that I think that they're good, I like doing research on that player. And whether that comes with, like doing a podcast like this, or whether that comes with, doing other types of content, like for a while, that was kind of a lot of the focus of my content, was finding cards or finding players and making content about them to kind of get the masses out and to let other people know. Because in this, I don't know, in this day of media and in this day of sports, there are so many different pieces of data that could point in the direction of a certain player or a certain card that would say this might be a good card to buy or a good player to buy. I tend to try and stay away from players that other people are talking about, because at least when it comes to certain players, I think that the value of even knowing who they are, or the value of within the sports card market, hearing someone else talk about that player, I actually think it gives a little bit more inflated value to a player's prices than maybe they should be getting, if that makes sense. And I know that I've done this for sure, like learning about a player and seeing their cards or seeing a new card or a new player, I get excited. So it's not a bad thing, I think, to buy some of these cards. It's important to be aware of the actual price that you're paying, because ultimately Bazana and Carglion, like, sure, I'll recommend their cards and I think that they're good players. And it's like, I'm not even sitting here saying that you shouldn't be buying their cards. I'm just saying that, you got to be a little bit more, I want to say, picky when it comes to those types of players and their type of cards, because like I said, you're going to find people who know those players and who are going to advocate for those players. And because that's like a whole, prospecting is an industry. There's multiple different places that make prospecting content. I mean, you got like MLB Pipeline, you got Baseball America. I mean, Baseball Reference, I don't know how much prospecting they necessarily do, but like those types of companies, like it's become prospecting in sports cards and outside of sports cards has become its own industry. And I guess I'll talk about it more from an in sports card perspective. It is going to be that, like, you having the knowledge of this player will ultimately help you make decisions about whether you should be buying them or not. And that seems pretty obvious, but I think to some people, we've gotten into a place in sports cards where people want to buy cards because, they heard someone talk about them. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. I just think, again, you have to be much more picky when it comes to the price you're buying the cards of. And I think we're also getting to a point where it's really hard to recommend like the regular base Bowman cards. And I think this is something that we're going to see, maybe that we've already seen, but I think there's a couple other things that we're going to see over the next few years, is that the numbered cards, and I mean, the regular base parallels I think are good, but the thing that they've done within cards is they've started adding all of these like crazy different parallels. And I don't really love that, if I'm going to be completely honest, but I think what we're going to see more of is people recommending that you should buy like The refractor, I think, is one. Like, whether it's numbered or non-numbered, I think the refractor or the gold parallel within regular Topps flagship, or the gold, or the rainbow parallel. I think the gold parallel, I'm pretty sure, is numbered. Or there's two actually now that I know that they added. They added a gold, and then they added a gold, like a gold matte gold, and then they added a gold numbered, which has been in there for forever. The amount of those cards that come out of packs now are a lot lower, which is also very unfortunate. But when it comes to these Bowman cards, I do think that the refractor is going to be one that, in my opinion, will probably end up being a better purchase than just like a regular base card. Obviously, once you start getting into numbered, those are just kind of that's even another conversation that I think, like, the numbered, because you know the rarity. And that's one thing, if you've heard me talk on this podcast, is that I am more interested in actual rarity versus like manufactured rarity. Like, I am more interested in the actual numbered cards, not the parallels that they've just over the past few years that have skyrocketed and really have been one of, I don't know, I don't want to call them bad things about sports cards, but I think that what they've done with the parallels is it's really just been a way for them to increase the profit for a lot of these companies. Like, I think it's the way that companies have increased the amount of product they can come out with without having to increase the autographs. And I think that's the big thing, like, that we've seen, not just with Panini. I think Topps has done it as well. Like, just for an example, like, there's a lot less numbered gold parallels, and then they added a whole new gold parallel that's sort of kind of part of what they're promoting in flagship. And then they decrease the amount of the gold parallel, like I said, the numbered one, and then they also decrease the amount of the rainbow parallel, which that is where I would be going if you're going to be buying any, rainbow parallel refractor, basically the same thing when it comes to Bowman versus flagship. But I would say going with those cards, you're going to find that you're going to pay more, obviously, but I think that ultimately with the rarity of those cards, that's where you're going to find that those will be much better purchases than the just, I guess I'll call them regular, like the regular base cards. Chris McGill, a.k.a. Chris House of Jordans, a.k.a. House of Jordans on Twitter. Obviously one of the, I think him and all the owners and all of the founders of Card Ladder are 2, 3, 4, mainly like there's the 3 founders. And I think that they are probably going to be some of the more influential people. If we look back at sports cards and we look at like the people who were the most influential and I think one of the more important periods of growth in our industry, the group at Card Ladder, in my opinion, will probably be one of the more important. And I mean, that being said, all the groups that are doing informational content the way that they're doing it, you could say Gem Raid is another example. I think even Sports Card Investor you could put into that conversation with their market mover tool and some of these new sort of inventions that have come around come around in terms of like, we hadn't seen a really like a good platform for aggregating data. But sorry, that's enough about the specifics. But how at House of Jordans on Twitter, Chris puts out, I think, really some phenomenal, really, if you're into data and you're into like specific sales, puts out some of the best content in the game. I mean, I was looking at some of his other posts and again, phenomenal. But the one that I want to highlight is one that I actually wrote about on Sports Illustrated. I know I keep referencing Sports Illustrated, but like if you are listening to this podcast and you like this podcast, then you should go to si.com/collectibles because there's a phenomenal group of writers we have. And great articles multiple times a day if you're really, and also on Hobbynewsdaily. Both websites are super important, I think, for the industry as a whole to document some of the stuff. But sorry, so yeah, SI on the Hobbynewsdaily podcast. Sorry. So he put out Chris McGill, House of Jordans, put out that there was an auction that ended over the weekend for a Jalen Brunson 1/1 Choice Nebula PSA 9. It's $96,000, which $96,000 for a Jalen Brunson card I think is pretty crazy, if I'm going to be honest. Sure, It's probably one of his best cards. I don't know if he has any like low numbered. I mean, maybe his one of one National Treasures RPA is maybe his best card, but Jalen Brunson, not exactly a player that was on the top of everybody's minds, which is sort of what I want to talk about in this podcast, kind of in tandem with yesterday's podcast as well. But so then he goes on in the tweet to say the card was originally, or it was once posted on the Blowout forums back in 2019, and they were asking $300 for it. I mean, it's really kind of remarkable that something like that can happen to a specific card. I mean, Brunson, on one hand, if you got the Dallas Mavericks, like let's go back to 2018, and this is kind of the other point that I was just alluding to. Let's go back to 2018, 2019. You're entering breaks for Prism basketball, or I mean, any basketball product from that sense. We're kind of, I think Jalen Brunson's going to see a bit of not a bit of a resurgence, but he is. Sorry, getting off topic. I'll continue the story as it was really going in chronological order here. Sorry. So you're doing these breaks. You get the Dallas Mavericks in the breaks, and you pull Jalen Brunson instead of Luka Doncic. Back in the day, you're probably pretty upset about that. I think Jalen Brunson for quite some time was really just, he was going to be the player that helped Luka get to a championship. But then when they started getting better players, Brunson sort of wasn't as impactful. And then obviously he goes to the Knicks, and he has, in a way, in my opinion, made the Knicks, I don't want to say relevant, because that almost is taking a dig at the Knicks. And obviously as a Celtics fan, I will take digs at the Knicks if I ever have the opportunity, but I'm trying to be a little bit biased. I'm trying to be unbiased here on the podcast. So Jalen Brunson goes to the Knicks. He then starts to get some of the players. Like, and again, Jalen Brunson was the National College Player of the Year. So it is, if you look at his narrative, maybe you could call it, it is interesting that like back in the day, he wasn't like a top pick, really. Like, and now, I mean, I don't know, he's maybe a top, I don't know, I would say top 30 player in the league, like probably the best player on the Knicks. I mean, him and Karl-Anthony Towns, I think, are on the same level of how good they are, but Brunson's the leader of that team, I would say. And so Jalen Brunson plays multiple years at Villanova, wins 2 championships, National College Player of the Year. Then the Knicks start to build the team around him, getting more of his Villanova players that he played with. Unfortunately, Dante DiVincenzo didn't make it into this. I mean, I don't know if Dante DiVincenzo is going to be like the Marcus Smart of the Knicks here, where it's like a player that everybody was really excited for and really liked, that kind of gets traded for, to say, again, traded, and then Karl-Anthony Towns comes in and could be one of the better, could be, again, he's on his good days, he's probably a top 25 player in the league. Interestingly enough, he just couldn't gel with what was going on with his former team, I guess. I don't really know, because I think I've always wanted Karl-Anthony Towns on the Celtics. But so this Jalen Brunson card, back in 2019, someone was trying to sell it for $300. Now it's selling for $96,000. I think it's one of the tales of sports cards where you never really, like, this type of thing is much more random than it might seem realistically. Like, it's similar to, I would say, like when breakers use the big hits in their card breaks as their marketing. Like, the hits in breaks are much more rare than something like, or no, they're much more rare than it actually happening. And then something like this is much more rare than that actually happening. Like, I think Jalen Brunson's career is going to be looked at, and from a sports card perspective, as like a player who really was just going to be second fiddle to Luka, to being one of the best players in a market that is starving. Obviously the Yankees just lost, unfortunately. And I think a lot of Yankees fans are probably also Knicks fans. And so the Knicks have been, starving for some sort of relevancy. Again, they were pretty good last year. Brunson and that crew were really good. Obviously, it's going to be tough with the Celtics, but if they can take down the Celtics, Brunson will probably go down as one of the most impactful Knicks. Maybe not the best Knicks, but like if he can bring them to some sort of either championship or, go on some sort of playoff run, this is going to be, it's a big deal. And the thing that's rare about that is that he wasn't necessarily a player that was on a lot of people's radars. And I think that, like I said, in tandem with yesterday's episode, sometimes the best cards or the best players to buy into are ones that people don't really pay that much attention to in theory. Obviously, you need to be doing your own research and you need to be doing your own analysis of a certain player to really know if they even have this opportunity. But this is sort of, I've talked about why I thought Tatum was actually a really good buy, and maybe I was biased as a Celtics fan, but like 2 or 3 years ago, before Tatum really was what Tatum is today, in my head, I looked at him, and maybe it's because I was watching him. I looked at him and I said, he has the best opportunity to go from a top 25 player to a top 5 player in the league. So, and again, top 25 versus 25. It's more of, there isn't one data point I think that is going to point you in the right direction. That's kind of the thing. It's like Tatum, saying someone's going to be a top 25 player and then looking at the price of their cards versus a top, Steph Curry, LeBron, Luka player and his cards. I think you look at those prices and you compare them. This one was probably more like a top 50 turned into a potential top 15, top 10. So again, there's never going to be one statistic that I think is going to point you in the right direction. But I think one indicator is going to be a player's ability to jump from one category to the next category, like in terms of how people rank them. And I think, in my opinion, and again, I'm sure there's tons of different indicators, I think that's one of the best ways to find cards of players who may be undervalued or maybe are just not priced correctly, which I guess that's the same thing kind of. But a player like Tatum going from where he was to where he is now. Jalen Brunson, another perfect example, going from where he was sort of not a second fiddle to one of the best players on the team in the biggest market. Like, those are some of the indicators that I would look at if I'm buying sports cards or if I'm trying to prospect. And Brunson, you could have been buying Brunson cards for 3 or 4 years. You could have been buying them until he got to the Knicks, and you probably would have seen decent returns on them. Now, I'm not saying that specific thing can be repeated within a different player, but in my opinion, looking for players, if I'm prospecting, I'm looking for players that people don't know of, and the prices are going to be lower, because if you start trying to buy players that are priced already really high, I think you're taking more of a risk, because the ranking of that player is already baked into the price, where I think with a player like Brunson, he maybe had a lot of potential, but like his cards were so not on the radar of the market that's why you see like such a dramatic jump. Like I said, a $300 card to almost a $100,000 card. So shout out to Coach Co, who I saw make a video about this on TikTok. eBay is finally rolling out a feature that I think a lot of people have been waiting for. You are going to have to be required to add a form of payment before you can bid on any item. And I think that this is a good step in the right direction for eBay. I have had my qualms, I guess, with eBay. I think that they, in some sense, they are implementing things that I think are good for cards specifically. I do sort of wish that eBay, I don't know. I mean, I guess they do cater to sports cards pretty heavily, but it's like it has to be one of their biggest. It has to be one of their biggest categories on the platform, if I had to guess, like sports cards and like trading cards in general. And one of the big issues that I think we've seen is people just not paying for cards or people canceling their bids. And it's like, I mean, that does two things. The one thing, it's like annoying for the person selling the card, because then if someone doesn't pay for it, then you have to relist the card, which, like, I do think there are listing fees, so you are technically even getting charged probably. And then the other one is just like people trying to create fake sales. That's another huge issue, which in theory, this doesn't exactly stop people from doing that. It does stop people from, because the thing is, if a card is paid for or not. And this is one thing actually I would want to see eBay implement, is whether a card was paid for or not. That, to me, would really, I think, be a step in the direction of transparency for eBay that I really would like them to see. But like I said, because people will put in a bid, and if they win the bid and they don't pay, the bid doesn't go away. I'm fairly certain. Like, it's still there, whether they paid or they didn't pay. And it still comes up as a sold listing, whether they paid or didn't pay. So now they're requiring people to put in that payment method before they're even allowed to bid on any of the cards or anything on eBay. I would imagine it's probably a site-wide thing. It's probably not just sports cards. But you have to, so it's going to be one extra step that's going to stop people, hopefully, from putting in fake bids. Now, again, I think actually this will stop this will basically determine that you will know that every card has been paid for. Now, whether that card has been paid for, it's not going to stop your buddy going and buying a card and then you just give him the money back and you don't give him the card or whatever, vice versa, and you're still creating that. But it is going to create, it's going to create at least one thing within one extra step, I think, for people to have to do to put in these fake bids if they're trying to sort of scam around the system on eBay. So, hopefully that does stop people from doing that. If I would never do that and have never done something like that, so I guess I don't know the thought process of someone that would want to do that. Now, if you're trying to scam, adding an extra step, I don't know. It seems like maybe it's not going to make that big of an issue, or maybe not going to make that big of a dent in terms of the scamming that is being done. But I think what it will probably do is it'll stop the people who are, bidding on items and not planning to pay for them. Which then, like I said, then that creates a sale of that item, which could be higher or lower depending on what that price ends up going for. I don't think it necessarily stops like refunds or cancellations. No, actually, maybe it does stop the cancellations, because if you have to put your information, your credit card information in theory, that would then you probably wouldn't be able to cancel a bid, I think. I think that's how it would work. Because that's another issue that I think people have been having with eBay is like, the classic meme that's like, oh, my son got on my eBay account and purchased this card and now like I don't want to pay for it. Can I just get a refund? I guess people are going to have to make sure their kids aren't bidding on their eBay. Like this, I don't know how you would ever be able to look this up, but I bet you now that the what was it? What would it be? It would be the amount of kids. I guarantee that with this implementation, the amount of kids who took their parents' phone and bid on a card and now they can't pay for it, that number is probably going to go to zero. It's I think a big issue like within sports cards, and maybe it's a big issue within anything. I mean, realistically, but I think that the change is going to be good. Do I think it's going to completely get rid of the fraud? Probably not. I do wish that there was maybe another extra step for eBay to, I don't know, come up with some sort of algorithm to flag accounts that like maybe have the same card that's being sold. Because like that's another issue that I think with PWCC, like they were really having that issue pretty badly on eBay. And I don't know if it ever really changed on their platform, if I'm going to be completely honest, because there was one of the red Bowman cards for Shohei Ohtani, his, I believe it was his pitching, which that would have been regular Bowman baseball, one of his Bowman baseball rookies, one of the red number 25 autos had sold through PWCC. I was looking this up. I was doing research for the new Ohtani sale, the newest sale of that like orange black label card.
that card had sold through, and this is the interesting thing that I've talked about with branding of this thing. The card sold through PWCC, but on Card Ladder, it says that it's sold through Fanatics Collects. So like there is 4 sales of this card in a like 2.5 year time span that Fanatics Collects owns. Like they are the ones that said that they sold this card. So now they have to sort of, I don't know, they have to be the ones to own that card. And I guess there isn't a review board necessarily is maybe one way to put it. There's no like review that anybody is doing on these cards or these sets or these products, whether you're selling on eBay. And it's not like you have to have a license. And this is, I understand that maybe adding a license to something like this is not necessarily the correct way to do it overall, but in some senses, it's like, I mean, I just wish that there was a better way to do it, basically. Like, I think changes on the platform and changes to how cards are displayed on the platform, or like, the licensing maybe is a little bit over the top, but like, it feels like there are certain circumstances within the industry that you should have some sort of credibility if you're going to try and sell. Like breaking, for example, might be one. I mean, even just buying and selling, I don't know, owning a store. Like this is kind of the weird thing about sports cards. It's like, it's a business that people can do with almost no overhead. Like really all of the overhead you have is going to be shipping supplies and then the cards that you're buying and selling. Maybe printer, paper, some other stuff like that. But I think overall, you can kind of do whatever you want. And it's like, you really have to be pretty notorious and pretty breaking the rules to even get in trouble for any of this type of stuff. Because I mean, we've seen people on eBay, like there's accounts on eBay, like the Probstein, for example, like they're one of the bigger sellers on eBay. And there's still issues with tons of their cards like that are being like shill bid. And it's like, how do you stop something like that? It's like, how do you even stop something like that? I don't really know. And I think it's not necessarily that type of thing I think you would need a license for, I guess, but it's like breaking, I think, is one that where it's like Fanatics, it feels like it should be something that's hard to get and easy to be taken away, if that makes sense. Like, I think it's a type of industry where you're making money off of, you're almost owning a lottery. Like, really, like, I think that's a scenario, that's a situation that I don't think many people really think about. Is like, if you're a breaker or you are somebody who does mystery packs or something, you are essentially the lottery. Like, and so whether you think that's a good thing or you maybe wish that there was a change there, there's no oversight from any company, really. I mean, sure, eBay, Fanatics Collects, whatnot, for example, they do a little bit, but overall, I think that there isn't as much as there should be. And like I said, I think we're going to see a pretty significant difference, or we're going to see a pretty significant drop in people posting eBay comments or eBay DMs of people being like, oh, my son or my daughter or whatever, they got on eBay and they bought this card and I can't pay for it. Can you cancel my order? I think we're going to see a very significant drop in those types of pieces of content online as eBay makes this big change. I will admit that it is a little bit odd when two stories like yesterday's podcast and then the story I'm going to talk about on today's podcast happen kind of all within a 1 week time span. And I don't think they're related. I can't imagine they would be related. But essentially, the New York Times and The Athletic came out with a story. Unfortunately, the $3.7 million O-Pee-Chee Wayne Gretzky case, sealed case, that sold back in February, which when I saw the story, I was like, that was February? Because I specifically remember talking about that. And I can't believe that was February of this year. It's wild. But so, unfortunately, the person didn't pay. And the box or the case is going to go back up for auction this upcoming weekend, I believe, through Heritage. And, it's just all around. It's a really unfortunate kind of series of events that happened with this case. Like, $3 million. I don't know how you even fit. I don't know what you could have done to fix this, because in the article they did explain that there was they did all the checks that they needed to do, and the person said that they were going to pay, and they did checks on financing and stuff, and then the person just decided not to pay. Which, if you're putting a $3 million bid, I don't know. I mean, again, this is the spokesperson, the person that was talking to The Athletic, was saying that this only happens with 1% of the auctions. It is unfortunate that that in this circumstance it happened when it was the case that sold for $3.7 million for the O-Pee-Chee 1979 Wayne Gretzky case. I mean, I'm not here to really cast blame, or I don't know. I mean, it's a really unfortunate for the seller, because I think what the other stuff, I'm just kind of going through the article and looking at some of the stuff that they said. Like, the seller, or the spokesperson at Heritage, also said that they probably predict that the case will sell in the same range. There were 19 other bidders, which I'm surprised that they didn't just sell to the other bidders, I guess. I mean, I don't know exactly what the rules or regulations are here with this sale. This seems like something that you could probably, this person probably gets sued. I can't imagine there isn't going to be any legal action for this. There has to be something within their contract that says if you're bidding and you don't, and this is, it's the interesting thing. Like I talked about on yesterday's podcast with eBay making that change to, you got to put your card information in before putting in any bids. It seems like there should have been some sort of deposit, because if you're bidding $3 million, or you're expecting to win a $3 million, well, not even $3 million, almost $4 million, almost $3.75 million on something like this, it does feel like a deposit would have been reasonable to ask for, I guess. And maybe it's not within their guidelines of what they want to do, ask for the deposit. I would imagine it's something that they probably are going to implement in the next year or so. So something like this doesn't happen, because it is fairly rare that this happens. I think it's good for Heritage to come out and say that this is why the case is going up for auction again, because in theory, they could have just said it's just going up for auction again. They didn't have to come out and say the person didn't buy it or the person didn't pay for it. But again, if you're bidding $3 million on something, it seems like that there should be some sort of deposit you have to put down, at least $100K. I don't know. I mean, again, I'm not running this auction house, so I don't know how you would implement stuff like this. But at the same time, that number just seems too high for you to just be like, yeah, no, I trust you. I trust that you're going to pay the almost $4 million for this thing, which I guess publicly the person was also trying to, before they paid, sorry. So they won the auction, and before they paid, apparently they were going around in some sports collection circles and trying to get higher bids for this item. And that is not uncommon, I think, within sports cards. I think, unfortunately, I think the industry has become a place where that is maybe more common than it was in the past, because, yes, there were people making money from buying and selling cards, but I do think that there was a certain section of people who were buying and selling who, I don't know if you could do this in person, really. You could say, no, I think there's probably people that were doing this in person. They probably would say, I've got this card, or they're trying to buy it, basically. And I think that this is, unfortunately, it's a dirty strategy, in my opinion, to not actually buy the card or buy the thing before you try and resell it, or at least give the money to the person. Because obviously, if you're flipping it and you can get, hypothetically, let's say somebody, I don't know. Let's just say somebody has a card at a table and it's worth $10,000. Let's just say that. Let's say it's some like Kobe or some LeBron auto or something like that. It says 10,000. Let's say they make the deal, they handshake. The guy goes, okay, I got to go get the money. I have to go get the money and then I'll come back and pay for it. Then that person walks around and he starts shopping the card for 12 million or 12,000. So it's like he then gets the 12,000 and then pays the 10. And it's like he just made 2K just like that. And I would say that strategy is probably pretty common. You probably are not doing it with like regular base cards. Like, you're probably not going to somebody or I mean, unless you're saying, you're buying in bulk, like that could be a possibility, but I don't think you're doing it with like, let's say like a Luka base card or like a PSA 10 that's just like very common that like you really are not seeing much of a fluctuation between prices because ultimately the price of something is what someone's willing to pay for it, not what you are willing to pay for it. If you're going to then try and sell it, it's what someone else would be willing to pay for it because that's what the market really is. Like that's it, and in my opinion, it's sort of it's one of my gripes. I think I would call it a gripe within the sports card market is that I think people are, which people I say like auction houses and I don't know, you could say maybe even influencers that are working with auction houses, they are trying to determine what the price of something is, and they're obviously going to price it on the higher end, and I don't think that's really. Again, some of these things may not come as a surprise to people, but like if you have this card and you're trying to sell it, you would want the most amount of money. But then also the interesting thing is that the person buying it also wants it for the cheapest price they can get. So it's like a constant battle between people who are trying to make money on the card and who are people who are trying to get the card cheaper, right? And I think I don't know. It's unfortunate that this had to happen with a $4 million rare one of one. That's like, this is the only known O-Pee-Chee Wayne Gretzky case in existence. So, you're going to run into the circumstance here where it's like you're not selling this really. Like you can't find a different market price for this. Like the person buying and the person selling are the ones setting the price. So, whether it sells for, 3.5 or 3, I think it's unfortunate that the seller really had to go through with this. And I would imagine there's got to be some sort of recouping of funds that the auction house is going to be able to do. Like, it just doesn't make much sense that. And I don't know if it's fraud. Like, that's kind of the other interesting thing here. Like, I don't know if this person just like actively committed fraud here and said that they had the money and said that they were going to pay for this thing and then rescinded their offer. And I don't know. I'm not 100% sure why they didn't just, why they waited so long? Maybe it was because, I don't know, actually. I'm not sure why they waited so long. Maybe there's some sort of market analytics here, and that's why they determined where was going to sell for. I don't really know for sure. But, like, it's weird that they didn't... Like, I wonder what the second highest bid was and where this starts at, if it starts... Or where it even ends. Because, again, I'm not 100% sure. I think Heritage is still waiting to put it up, but... it's a one-of-one piece that, unfortunately, somebody came in and decided that they were going to try and flip it, which is, like, crazy that they would try and do that with a $4 million item. But I don't know. It just is unfortunate that it had to happen with a piece of history like this that is one of a kind, and I don't suspect that there will ever be another 1979 O-Pee-Chee Wayne Gretzky case.